had me at Cello, Cello. You had me at Cello. You had me at Cello. Oh, you had me at Cello. Playing the cello has so many pluses. It never grows old. Hello, everybody. It's 5 o'clock on a Friday again. Time for another episode of Cello Chat. And today I have with me Janet Horvath. Very excited to have you on the program, Janet. And how are you doing?
I'm doing great, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Tremendous, tremendous. Well, you have like a lot of cellists, you have a very interesting background and story. Would you tell the viewers how you got started in music in the first place and how you got where you are?
Well, my father was a professional cellist as well, and my mother was a very wonderful teacher of piano, young students. And I would pick out the melodies when I was really very young, and they thought, okay, she's so talented, let's have her study piano. And then when they saw that I could play a little, they said, oh, but let's not waste her on piano. Let's give her the cello, because in those days it was so unusual for a woman to play the cello. And my mother imagined me coming on stage in a long dress and wowing the audiences, never imagining, I don't know why, that I would be so tiny. I'm just 5 feet tall. And so they decided I would play the cello. And I'm sure I did want to follow in my father's footsteps. But when he tried to teach me, I would cry and he would yell, and my mother would say, leave her alone. And, there were all these battles, which are typical. If you've ever tried to teach your child how to drive, you know what I mean? So no teacher was really good enough for him. He would send me to somebody else, and then he'd say, oh, they're playing duets. She has to play Grützmacher studies, So, a few years went by when I would tolerate my father and then, really practice the piano. And so when it came time to enter college, I wasn't that good on the cello, but I was quite good on the piano. But I didn't want to relinquish the cello. And so I decided to be a double major, which is kind of crazy. But right before the actual decision for teachers, I decided to quit the piano and focus on the cello. And, my mother was beside herself, and people thought, oh, you're too small to play the cello. But I was determined to prove them wrong. And I tried to make up for what I thought was lost time. I did end up being able to study with Starker, Janos Starker at Indiana University. And I was one of the elite few that got to be in his class. And so I decided I would practice. Like, I wanted to be the best Sharka student who ever lived. And that's when I hurt myself, which is not surprising. I got very small hands, but to practice hours a day is never a good idea without breaks, without stretching, without taking a walk, without ruminating on the music away from the instrument. So I was very lucky that Starker, when he came back from a tour, actually hid his horror quite well, and decided that we would start from the beginning, eliminating all tensions, playing with ease, relaxation, great posture, taking breaks, building up gradually from the beginning. And it worked. I was terrified that I would hurt myself again, but we were very, very careful. And in the end, that is how I became an injury prevention advocate, because I suffered quite a bad injury that took me on the sidelines for quite a long time. So after that, I was, full steam ahead. I was went to Aspen, was principal cello there. Then I was won the job for associate principal cello in Indianapolis Symphony, which was the stepping stone to come to Minnesota, where I was the associate principal cello here for 32 years.
Tremendous. Now, how do you feel, or do you feel that your years studying piano intensively were helpful to you also as a cellist?
Tremendously. I was lucky to have a wonderful teacher, and musicality is the same no matter what instrument you play. And to be able to sing long lines, to be able to interpret music, understand the styles, there were great lessons to be learned from studying the piano.
Excellent.
And harmony, the harmonies that, cello is one line, you would get a different sense of the harmony, being able to play multiple lines.
Oh, all right. And I remember Christopher Bunting would also talk about the merits of piano practice, just even from the standpoint of the finger independence and the finger strengths, particularly in the pinkies, that can be useful on cello as well.
But it's also a great tool for memory. So very often you might rely on digital memory, and that can fail when you're under pressure. Yeah. So you should always try to back up your memory with 2 or 3 other ways. And one of the ways is either singing it away from the cello, visualizing the music, but also playing it on another instrument helps you really solidify the notes that you're playing.
Good point. Very good point. All right, motivation. Yeah, I always ask people their thoughts on motivating students. There's always that group that's always self-motivated, but then there's another group that kind of wants to be helped to find a love of practice even on the tough days. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that it's really important to incorporate joy. So I advocate having the student select something that they want to play. Obviously we all have to practice the studies and scales, but a piece that they want to play that's not way beyond their ability, but also that joy in playing is really important. And also then playing with people. That always is a much happier situation than being by yourself and locking yourself in the room, which I did for years and years and years. Playing chamber music is really important.
Yeah. Other humans are inspiring, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, now I have another, before I want to get in a little bit more into depth about your thoughts on injury prevention, but just even the fact that you mentioned when you were, kind of relearning, practicing after the injury, you put more of a focus, is it fair to say you put more of a focus on the mental practice side of things?
There was a great deal of mental practice, but also the ease physically is so important. People equate working really hard and sweating, and with cellists, you would always say, look at my fingers, there's big grooves and tears in my finger calluses, must be that I'm a great cellist, and I say, no, it means you're pressing too hard or your bridge is too high or both. And that doesn't, lowering my bridge, which I would usually do at this time of year, and I'd go into a luthier and he'd say, oh, well, that's viola height. And I'd say, well, wait a second, does that make me a lesser musician if I make it easier for myself to play? And no, it doesn't. So it's really important to keep your body in neutral, to not do anything like, I'm playing Dvorak concerto, twisting and turning your body, pressing hard. We try to instill the idea of weight in the arms instead of pressing, biting, those terms can sometimes become misinterpreted. that we want to play where our body allows our weight to make the music come out of the inside of you. You know, you want to express the music and not be squeezing the instrument to death. Yeah. So it's really important to be comfortable and play with ease.
So much so, so much so. I before we pressed record, you and I talked a little bit about those students, youngsters that are either because they're perfectionists or they're just whatever the case is, they just kind of beat their head against the passage figuratively until, you know, thinking that they'll eventually get it to you know, they'll win out over it through brute force. So there's some of what you're talking about, and you even have some videos on YouTube giving some advice in a different direction from that approach. But I'd also say that sometimes there's a level of obliviousness to their own body in younger players. Like, do you have a sense roughly in when you're practicing healthily, how much of your awareness is on all of your muscle movement?
Not very much.
Okay.
For me, yes, I'm always aware of my posture. And if something is tight or hurting, I stop immediately. A teacher needs to teach that. And so few of us, especially my generation, had any kind of injury prevention training. Mm-hmm. We didn't want to be jocks. And so we didn't look at ourselves as athletes. And we really are the Olympians of the small muscle groups. I mean, I've done talks where we have totally, you know, board members, totally people who have not played. And I had them lift their arms up and I conducted them. I set a metronome and I had them try to mime playing, and they couldn't even do that for a minute. So we forget how physical it is, what we do over and over and over during our practice time. So it's really important to steer the young person to thinking about, okay, how can I do this where I feel just so, you know, floppy in my arms? You know, what's the difference between that and how I'm pressing on the string? To have jargon that includes, well, Starker used to say the bow technique was spreading peanut butter or using a paintbrush, and, you know, rather than press, squeeze, bite, you know, all those words. So it's also important to instill in a student how to warm up. Include that in the lessons, how to warm up, how often to take breaks. We say 10 minutes per hour is the minimum, but taking time to breathe and wiggle and adjust your seating and let your arms hang down is very important within that 40 minutes of playing time. Increase your practice load gradually. Very often, you know, a kid is going to do an audition or a competition and they're suddenly playing 5 hours when they're used to 1 hour. Reduce your practice intensity before performance. So often people will walk out on stage for an audition and they're playing and playing and playing. Once they get out there, they're too tired to do what they have to do. So there are ways that a teacher can steer a young person towards this kind of awareness. Yeah.
So Phyllis Young comes to mind, first and foremost to mind, as somebody who, whenever she was not playing cello, she still, in some respects, had her cello hat on, her cello awareness. You know, every time she would make a motion, she'd go, "Oh, this is so much like a good legato bowing, isn't it?" or something. And I see sometimes the opposite in youngsters, where even if they do manage to make a priority out of an awareness of really healthy, prepared movements with momentum, etc., then they just walk around maybe with their shoulders very high or something, and just doing things in a way that is almost like they go back to being kind of oblivious of the impact of the laws of physics on their body. Do you kind of coach students as well to use their body in a healthy manner even when they're not practicing?
Sure. I mean, what comes to mind is like driving. When you're first starting to learn, you're, hanging on for dear life to that steering wheel and your shoulders are up. And that's one example where, you don't have to grip the cello bow or the steering wheel or the handle of your case. All of those things add tightness and tension to your body.
All right, for sure. Yeah. Well, I also like what you mentioned about, I'm just thinking, sorry, going back, setup wise, sometimes when you go and work with some students at a school and some of them have very high strings, there are definitely, or some schools who shall remain nameless. I've just seen places where they seem to want to bump students up to the next larger size cello. They want to bump them up to a full size cello earlier than I would. There's definitely aspects of the setup too that if you're aware of how playing cello does not have to be ever, like a Herculean effort.
Right. It isn't. It doesn't have to be. I mean, yeah, there are some very difficult things, but if you're making it easier for yourself, that's good. Somebody who's my size doesn't necessarily benefit at all from playing a huge instrument that, is hard to even hold because the body's so big. I always advocate for staying with smaller instruments that have easy to play, narrower necks, fingerboards, lower strings, lighter bows. I mean, people go around saying, oh, I've got a Todd bow that's 900 grams, but that doesn't necessarily produce a bigger sound.
Yeah. All right. Well, and so you played for many years in a very major orchestra, the Minnesota Orchestra. I know that all of the anecdotes from the years would fill a book, but what were some of the highlights of playing not only at a high level in an orchestra, but playing in that orchestra for those years?
Well, it was very exciting. It was a wonderful career. We played massive works that you really had to watch yourself because week after week we'd be playing the big Strauss works and the Mahler symphonies and all that. When I was in the orchestra, we played 4 concerts a week and they were sold out. It's a little different now, but more interesting things are going on as far as not just quantity, but quality, which is great. It was a great career. It was a time that we could really reach people and touch people in ways that were really important. Yeah. But in the meantime, I was playing a lot of solos. I was playing chamber music. And, during that time, I wrote this book because I found that there were the downsides of playing 4 concerts a week with 4 rehearsals and only 1 day off a week was that one day off, we'd have to cram to learn the music for the next week. And over time, there were a lot of people that were injured, out with injuries. And I thought, oh, we have to do something about this. So I organized one of the first conferences on injury prevention in the 1980s. Yeah. And
excellent. And is that when that book came out?
This book came out in 2002, I think it was.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, because people would call me and I would have to run around the house looking for information for these people. So I wrote the book in self-defense, really. There wasn't a resource where things that were in musicians' terms and layman's terms, all the insights and injury prevention and on, injury susceptibility quizzes and what to do to prevent it and how to recover after having an injury. All that is in one place. So that was good.
A tremendous resource. Yeah. And thank you for your contribution to helping make that awareness level go up. It is heartening to see that it is more, there is a lot more awareness than some decades ago. Just everything from the Alexander technique and Feldenkrais and body mapping. And it seems like there's a lot more resources for a student who wants to avail themselves of information like that, including your book.
There is, and there's also the Performing Arts Medicine Association.
Yes, right.
That has been around now a number of decades, and it's a resource if you want to write to them and get a recommendation for somebody that can help. There are more professionals out there that actually know about what the stresses are on musicians, so that you don't get you can't do your up bow staccato, or okay, well, take 3 weeks off and take some aspirin and come home. That isn't very useful.
No,
that's how it used to be. Yeah.
Oh,
it's all in your head. Can't hurt to play, right?
Well, and speaking of books, you since then have written another one. Can you talk some about the book that has just come out this year?
Right. Well, I went back to school and got my MFA in creative writing. Not that I didn't think I knew how to write, because I had the other book, but here it is. That's actually me. But I went back to school because I had no idea how to put a massive book like this together. It's 70 years of history. And I was a child of Holocaust survivors. My parents were both from Budapest, Hungary. And my father was a budding, brilliant cellist who thought he has a big career in front of him. And he was already playing in the Budapest Symphony when he was 20. And then the war broke out. And for a while, Hungary was protected because the Jewish people of Hungary were protected because Hungary became an ally of Germany. And not too many people know that particular history. So not until 1944 were the Jewish people of Hungary threatened and deported. So I knew my parents had gone through something awful. It hovered over us like a dark cloud, but it was never spoken of, especially not by my mother. My father, we just thought he was kind of a wimpy, weird, weak guy, because sometimes he would cry at night and he would have these nightmares, and we thought we'd done something terrible to make him mad at us, right? A child would blame themselves. So it wasn't until I was a professional and here that one day I was visiting Toronto. My parents, our childhood was in Toronto, Canada. And I was driving my father to a doctor appointment, and he was 87 at this point. And he was sometimes hard to talk to just personally, and no small talk. He loved to talk shop. He wanted to talk cello and music all the time. So I'm driving on a yucky, slushy day, and I thought, okay, I'll ask him about music. He played with some of the greatest conductors in Europe, Sir John Barbaroli and Beecham and all these people, Kertész, but I'd never asked him about my idol. So I said, Dad, did you ever play with Leonard Bernstein? And it was as if he passed out. He put his hand to his face, and his eyes rolled back into his head, and he kind of went, somewhere else for a minute. I thought, oh, geez, what did I say? Should I pull over? What's going on? And then he sort of came to, and he said, yes, it was a very hot day. He was just a kid. He came into Munich, and he played Rhapsody in Blue, and it was just fantastic. And it was in the Jewish orchestra in the displaced persons camps. And I talked to him, and I said, I want to come to America. And he was fantastic. And then the memory was gone, or his willingness to speak about it. He kind of huddled against the side of the car. And before I could even get my tongue around all the questions that were in my mind. What were you doing in Germany? And was my mother there? And how did you get the strength to play? And where did you get instruments? And this was right after the war. The memories seemed to be gone. I raced to the computer that evening once I got him settled and Googled it. And sure enough, it was on Leonard Bernstein's website that he was invited to conduct the orchestra in Munich right after the war. But he sought out this group that he heard about, an orchestra of survivors who were playing in the displaced persons camps, bringing morale-boosting programs to those still languishing, waiting for news of loved ones, waiting for paperwork to leave Europe. And that's how the story started. When I found out that, later I found out, I Googled all over and found out that there had been a printed program. Mm-hmm. And I found where it had been donated in New York. And I wrote to that museum, and they said, yes, please make an appointment the next time you're in New York. We'd be glad to show you the program. But don't you want to see the live video testimony and the photographs? So I did. On the next attempt, it was March. It was May. The orchestra went to Carnegie Hall to play, and I had a window of time to race down to Battery Park to the Museum of Jewish Heritage to see, in these tiny black and white photos, pictures of my father with Leonard Bernstein. Mm-hmm. And I had imagined, an orchestra like the one I played in, 100 members. It was 17 musicians. My father was one of 2 cellists. Hmm. And my father didn't play 2 concerts. He played 2 with Leonard Bernstein. He played 200 concerts over a period between 1946 to 1948. 2-3 concerts a week where they were bussed to bring these programs to people. So I thought, okay, this is a story that has to be told. And so that's the jumping off point of my book. And I unravel the story for the readers as I do for myself, that it was a mystery that I had to try to find out the facts. So it covers a lot of ground. It covers my career, my father's career, auditions, concerts, and it covers Hungarian foods and humor, and it also covers the history going back to those times. And finally, my father saw that I was so interested in learning about it. I mean, I was afraid to ask about it when I was younger. I was afraid to bring up painful memories. I was afraid to hear the stories. But this was the last year of my father's life. I didn't obviously know that at the time, but he understood that I really needed to know. And so he wrote down his testimony and read it to me in Hungarian. And my Hungarian's good, but my spelling's horrible. And I didn't have the vocabulary of an adult. I didn't know how to say lynching poles, wheelbarrows, gravel pits, some of those words. So I sounded them out and looked them up later. So I got my father's testimony 6 weeks before he died. Yeah, so it was a huge deal. And I bring the story full circle. It's not a I'm not telling you something I shouldn't be, but the ending is as the beginning, because on the 70th anniversary of these concerts with my father and Leonard Bernstein, the city of Landsberg, Germany, which is where the displaced persons camp was, held a 70th anniversary commemorative concert. And I was invited, and they asked me if I would play Kol Nidre for that program, which was really mind-boggling, cathartic. And so the book ends with reconciliation. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. That's very moving. Wow. That had to have been quite an experience. And for the audience too, for the other people. There's a YouTube video of you playing Kol Nidre, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's very beautiful. You have a very beautiful tone and vibrato.
Thank you. It was a little bit of a challenge, not only mentally, but they had me play with the Landsberg School Orchestra, and they at first sounded like any junior high orchestra. There were some 12-year-old very young people, and I whipped them into shape. I tried to goad them into understanding the deep, poignant meaning behind the work. And I have to say that during the concert, we kind of went to another plane. It was like an out-of-body experience for all of us. They played better than they knew they could, basically. Yeah.
Music can do that.
Yeah.
Well, and the book came out on your father's birthday. Do I remember reading that somewhere? That's nice too.
The end of February this year. Yeah.
All right. Excellent. Wow. Best of luck to you with that book, and with everything, of course. But wow, that's quite a story.
Yeah.
So Janet, what future projects? What do you have in the works for either the rest of 2023 or beyond?
Well, this year I'm really focusing on presentations with this book. I'm very excited that I just my publisher just signed a contract to do an audio book, and with a lot of emails, they've agreed to have me record Kol Nidre and put it in the audio book. So that's going to be really exciting. That's
perfect.
This month, a big thing. And I'm speaking a number of places through the end of the year and into next year. So I'm still writing for a wonderful music magazine called Interlude HK. So it's www.interlude.hk. It's run by a woman out of Hong Kong, but who grew up in France. And it's a wonderful magazine. There are several writers, and I've written 4 books, 380 articles so far. Everything from funny backstage stories to music I love, to cellists, to other artists. And so I urge your readers to explore that magazine if they don't know about it. And so there's still a lot going on.
Wow. All right. Well, I know that my viewers are surely as excited as I am to check all that out.
Thank you.
Wow. Yeah. Well, and best of luck. I think certainly stories like this need to be told, and there's still a degree to which even just the life of a professional musician, it's kind of funny to me that there's still a lot of people that just think that it's a talent thing and you're just born with it. They don't realize.
You mean you still have to practice?
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, they don't know any better until they read. They'll read a book and then they'll learn. Hopefully. All right. Well, best of luck with all of that, Janet, and thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. We've covered a lot of territory, and there's just so much more. I hope people will take the time, and the injury prevention resources as well. Basically our field of music, as much time as we have to pour into it, the more rewards we get out of it.
That's true. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And best of luck, all of you out there, all week long. We'll meet back here next Friday at 5. See you then.
You had me at Cello, Cello, you had me at Cello.